Boom, recording. So we're going to do the first part of our sort of work on asynchronous JavaScript, and we'll follow this up again on Sunday. So we'll mostly focus on just getting visibility on stuff. What is this thing called asynchronous JavaScript? You might have heard it been used before or been talked about. What is asynchronous programming? So we're just going to have a look. I'm going to start off with a short demonstration, and then we're going to just do some work getting visibility. So the first little exercise that we're going to do is just have a look at some asynchronous behavior in action, and then we're going to do some getting visibility stuff. So we'll come back to this in a second, but let's have a look. So I have find this locally, and I have this up. So what I'm looking at the moment is this page here, index.html, right here. And I'm just going to open this in my browser, and it's just 15 lines of code, and we're going to see what happens. So I'm going to go into following this one, and I want to open index.html. Now, for those keen-eyed of you, what did you just see that happened? I'll do it again in a second. But was anyone paying attention to what you saw on my page? Amit, what did you see on my page?
I think I saw like maybe index, some word before Mary, and then it quickly.
Yeah, you did. Mary. Awesome. Let's do it. Let's do it again and see whether you're paying attention.
No, no one.
Cool. So we're gonna have a look at this in a second, but if I keep doing it, and maybe lots of times, and keep refreshing the page here, you'll see that something appears on the page first, and then the page updates. And we're going to explore this in a second. So this 15 lines of code is doing something, right? It's showing us a page, and then there's another action at some point that's happening that changes, as you might imagine, no one to Mary. So it loads the page with no one and then gets updated. And this is happening quite quickly. You can see in this network tab, there are three things that happen. We load the index page, we make a request to get some jQuery, and then there's this thing that happens. And all this takes no more than 1/5 of a second. So all these things are happening really, really quickly, which is why you can see it just like flash. But we're here to think about asynchronous behavior. So these are the 15 lines of code, and it's this line in particular that is doing something. So maybe, Anastasis, can you just read out line 8? Either like on my screen, or if you're looking at it yourself, like just read it back out to me. What's on this line?
It gets from the API from line 7.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets the person name.
Cool. On a high level, that sounds broadly right. Let's break it down a little bit. Let's stay with you, Anastasia, for one more question. What is, if you had to describe this this thing here? What is it? Is it a variable? Is it a method? What is it?
It's a method that gets from line 7. Mm-hmm. It gets some data.
Cool. And how many arguments to this method are
there? 2.
Nice. So we have the URL as the first argument, and then we have all this thing as the second argument. And this is the thing that says, once you made this request, this URL, then do this thing. So this is the thing that happens later. And this is important because this is the bit that's asynchronous. This happens at some point later. When the browser reads this page line by line, we go through it, and that's why we see no one. And at some point, this callback gets executed, and that's the asynchronous behavior here. Not all functions are asynchronous, but this GET request is asynchronous because we don't want to block the page. We want to be able to sort of let the page render and fire off this request, and at some point it will execute and then do its work. And the work is specified by this callback function. It's just a function written that takes in what is the response and what to do with the response. Here it says, let's take the element with the ID of person, which you can see down here. Take the element that has an ID of person and update the HTML to be whatever is in the people response at position 0 dot name, whatever this is. So that's what updates no one to Mary at some point. And you can see here in the request tab the order in which things happen. We load the index page, and you can see when the first time we load it, it starts with no one. Because that's all that's happened at the moment. The second thing that happens is it's made this request to jQuery. It says, go get me this information. This is just a bunch of JavaScript, so we can actually have a look at this in the browser. Let's not minify it so we can actually read it. It's just a file with a bunch of JavaScript that we can now use. It just loads it, so we have access to all this JavaScript. We don't need to worry about what it is. It's just a helper library. And then the third thing that happens, because we need to load this library in order to use this $, which is the sort of entry point to all of this JavaScript that we just loaded, we make a request, and that's this third thing here. So we make a request to the URL, make a GET request, and we've been quite familiar with these. But the important thing is that the page continues to render, and at some point it gets executed, and the information then gets updated. Now, it's important to note that at this point in time, when the browser reads this, it has no idea what this element is. It's only because it gets executed later, the callback, that it then knows what the ID is. And we can check this by, let's have a look. Let's have a look at what .html is. Let's do it before. And let's do it after. And let's also do it during. Let's do it so we can see the order in which these things are happening. So I've just put 3 logging statements, one before we execute the request, the second during the request, and the third after. And we'll see at which point these things happen. So I'm going to reload it in my browser. I'm going to switch to my console so I can see them. And you can see that the before and after happens straight away, but the during waited. During is because it's the callback function that gets executed only when the request has been made. So we log before and we keep going straight away to after. And this part here, this block of code as the callback doesn't get executed until the request has been sent. So we log before, we have no idea what the person is, we log after, and then at some point when this happens, we finish rendering and we have the ID available to us. So the asynchronous behavior happens in this example quite simply. And it's this function in particular, which is the asynchronous function. And a lot of people, when they first start thinking about asynchronous behavior, because they come from Ruby, they think that this one here, this line 11, this log has to happen before this does. And that's not the case.
Ed?
Yeah.
Does when does the .get run as opposed to the block of code in it? Because the logging that you've done shows when the block of code that's passed.
It's because this happens in between these two logs.
So it's before .get, after during.
Exactly.
Well, that's what I thought, but I wanted to make sure.
Yeah. So this, let's have a look. Essentially, the return value of the get method is what we call a promise. That says it's like the wrapper around the asynchronous call that says we're gonna wait, we're gonna create an object and wait for the response to come back in. So if we do something like let's request, let's call it a request object, and then console log it. You can see that this thing here is like the object that holds the information about the request and the response. Right? It's not the information, which is what a lot of people get confused about. It's not the result of the execute the callback. Right? So the get request at this point just says, I've just created a request. Here's the request, and at some point it will finish. We don't know. So we do on line 7, we log like what the element is. At the moment, we haven't finished rendering the page, so it doesn't know what it is. On line 8, we set a variable to be the URL. On line 9, we make the request. But the return value of the method is not the result of the request, it's just the request object.
So so when it does .get, does it start making the request to the API? So while it's almost like there's this API request happening, while after is logged, the original HTTP is loaded. So the request to that API URL is happening as soon as the .get method is called. It's just the rest of the code that then happens, that $person doesn't happen until that response is completed, which is after everything else is kind of queued up and cleared.
Yep, exactly. So that's pretty much it with this example. And I wanted to be able to start with this so we can actually see it happen on our screen, where we can see the browser continue. It makes a request, but it continues by rendering no one. And then at some point, the page gets updated. And the page gets updated. And the last thing that happens is this block of code here. So this is this one. So this small exercise, we're not going to spend too much on because I want to go into the next one. But feel free to come back into this and like keep doing what I did and do your console logs and just like understand the flow of control. But we're going to go quickly into this one because it's pretty much the same thing. It's just talking about asynchronous events. And this is the one where I want you to do some of these exercises as well. So if we read through it, the main objectives of this evening, and again on Sunday, is to think about the flow of control of a program as the order in which these parts are executed, and get better at having a process to follow the flow of control. And essentially, the main process we're doing is console log, get visibility on the order of execution. So logging numbers in order is a really good way to think about the order in which things happen. Sometimes I like to log like the method name and like, am I like, depending on where I am, in which branch of code. Just like whatever system works for you, just think about what is the process to follow how your code is executing. And let's do this in the situation with callbacks. So let's take this very simple asynchronous bit of behavior. Imagine you want to follow the flow of control in this code. You want to understand what parts run and in which order. So let's use a technique where we just log numbers and see what order these happen in. So let's go back to my browser. And I'm going to copy this code and throw it in here. So let me make it a little bigger so you can see. So what this is doing is we're making an assumption about the order of things, and we're going to see whether we're right or not. You might already be jumping ahead and knowing this is not the order in which things happen, and that's fine. So we make an assumption of how things will work, and then we run the code to see if the numbers get printed in the order that we think they do. And this can happen also in synchronous programming in your Ruby code and whatever code that you want to do, is just get in the habit of logging things so you get visibility of the order in which things are happening. If your prediction is incorrect, examine it, understand why, and experiment. So let's have a look. So I'm going to hit enter. And I can see here that when I hit enter, I log 1 straight away. And then the next one to get logged is line 4. Because nothing inside this block of code has been executed yet. And this is the thing about callbacks. I haven't triggered this event. What event? I was going to say Katrina. I thought you were going to be one of the students in the class. Amit, what event is going to happen, or what event am I listening to in this function here?
Click.
Cool. So if I click on the window on the white space, what's going to happen?
It will then get 2 and 3. It will
Yep.
2 click 3.
Exactly. And it'll keep happening. Yeah. So it's probably quite intuitive the way this is working. But we have to just remember that in JavaScript, it's asynchronous sometimes, and we have to remember which functions are asynchronous. Almost every add event listener is asynchronous, takes the callback. And there are a few things that we'll experiment with this evening and on Sunday. What are asynchronous functions? We've seen the GET requests, like API calls, are asynchronous. Add event listener is asynchronous. It sets up the browser to listen to, or essentially to hook into the click event. And when the browser registers that click event, it then executes the block code that we've told it to. Browser's full of so many different kinds of events that you can hook into. You can hook into mouse press, mouse movement, mouse down, click, mouse over, like hover, all these kinds of things. There's so many events that you can hook into and trigger events. And we do this through this API using the document and then using the add event listener. Clearly, not in a browser, document doesn't exist, right? So document is a very specific web API that we can access using JavaScript. And you can find all the documentation about the document and the add event listener on, like, the best JavaScript docs available at the moment are on the Mozilla dev docs.
You can put a .add event listener onto like a specific
any element.
You know, this paragraph with this ID or something.
Exactly. On any element, yeah.
Can I just check my understanding of some of the syntax? So document.add event listener, click is an argument of add event listener telling it what it's looking for. The empty brackets that follow it are essentially creating an anonymous function. So
it's not just the empty brackets by itself. It's the brackets and the arrow, and then anything that follows it. Yes. Yeah. It's mostly this part here.
And so if you write something in those brackets, you're effectively defining, you are naming an argument for this anonymous function.
Yeah.
So,
and conventionally for event listeners, you pass in the event itself, so then you can access any of the event data. But here, because I'm clicking, I don't need anything. I don't need an argument.
And so that means that you can actually write your function, your callback function, elsewhere in your code. And instead of doing brackets, arrow, curly braces, do this, you would just write the name of the function.
Exactly. So I could do something like, let me, can you still see it down here?
Yep.
Let's say, let's write a callback as anonymous function that, what does this do? Let's just say it does the same thing. And so then I can now do the same thing that I did before, but then just pass in the callback. Yeah.
Yeah, cool, thanks.
So what I want you all to do is just spend some time console logging. That's all we're going to do this evening. Console logging, and then go off and research if you want to. But mostly it's just in different events, and we're going to do these different questions. It's just console log your way through the questions and have a look at what's happening. So there are 5 questions here, and then I want you to spend about maybe half an hour, 45 minutes, maybe an hour, up to you, and going through these questions. Allow yourself to explore, do some research. But the main thing is console log your way through them and understand the order in which things are happening, and just get into this habit of following the flow and being explicit about it. And console log is the technique of being explicit about understanding the flow of your code. And there was something here, yeah, up here. Now, following the flow fast is something that you all should have in the back of your mind, something that you should get better at. Good devs, experienced devs do this really quickly. They see a bit of code, they can visualize it, they read it, and they can trace it in their minds very quickly. And so we just need to get better at this habit. And so we'll start off quite simply, being explicit, console logging it. You can build the intuition by making predictions. Whenever you read some code, what is it going to do, and then verify it. So if you're, and that's how you can get feedback for yourself, like, are you thinking about the right things? Cool. So I've demonstrated just doing the click, and yeah, it says 40 minutes. You can spend 40 minutes or more. We might wait until about 7:45. Pair up. Clone the repo, you've probably already done this. Navigate into it. Make sure you've got the latest copy. As I did, open up the HTML file in your browser. Do you see hello? I didn't see hello. Oh, okay. Looks like it should be. Is that index.js anywhere? Yes, it is. Yeah, right. Oh, because I was on the wrong HTML file, that's fine. For each question, paste the provided code into your JavaScript file, and then you can reload it in your browser and follow the process. Make sense about what we're going to split up and do?
Do we have pairs for today?
Great question. Oh, I'm not on my normal laptop, so let's do it manually. No autocomplete either, so let's do it Macros Academy. Coach. This might not work for one. It should work.
Such behind the scenes, Zed. Wow.
You what?
It's like such behind the scenes reveal. Like normally, I don't think the devs have access to Mecha Coach, do they?
Really?
Only we do. I don't know, do they? I thought
I
it
think
was
so.
online. Is it on in the course?
I think everyone can see this, right?
Oh, well, there you go.
It's just a repository, right?
I thought it was on our private course though, but maybe it's not. In which case, everyone go wild. Mecha Coach is great. Whenever I trigger the pairs manually, I get such a buzz. And you could do the same. You could really mess with the other cohorts and just trigger their pairs at random times. But don't do that. We like them. They're all right. But you could technically. Sometimes I forget to remove there's like an example cohort that's July 219, and sometimes when I trigger the pairs manually, I forget to remove that. So July 219 just get suddenly triggered into pairs, and they're like, ha 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 ha, and I'm like, yep, it's me again. It's great.
I think I set up like some test data that is all about me. So if you trigger it on one of the test, anyway, that's irrelevant. So a little Easter egg for you after I've gone. Okay, we have pairs. We have some directions about the more instructions we're going to do. Does anyone have any questions about what we'll spend the next 45 minutes on?
You're still recording. I don't know if you know about that.
Let's pause that recording. Welcome back, folks.
Hi, Sabiha. What did you find?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, after I did that, I found the different names in the array, and they were at different indexes. Yeah,
love it. Me and Sabiha just did some speed debugging. When you said we had like 59 seconds left, it got quite intense, and there may have been some wild encouragement from poor Sabiha just got like really stressful. I was like, let's do it, Sabiha, we've got 50 seconds, go. It's fine, we did it. We learned some things, so I think it was okay overall.
yeah, it was quite fun.
just some mild trauma in there.
Cool. So we have about 50 minutes, and I wanted to just spend the time and throw it back to you and be like, let's go through any questions that you have. I'll do those first. If not, I might want to point out a couple of things. But otherwise, that's pretty much it going to be for this evening. Otherwise, I'll be back to pairing for the rest of it. Continue on this or not. But let's start with questions. What questions came up, or confusions, or things that would be good for me to go through?
We looked at question number 3, the one where it adds the idea of like return people response.
Yep.
And we noticed that that did not seem to do anything in the console.
Yep, correct.
And my sort of idea there was like it's not being returned to anything. Like exactly. There is nothing you can really do with the return from a callback. Or exactly. Is there a way that you can catch the return of a callback so that you can do something with it?
No, you cannot.
There is no way.
So the asynchronous function returns a promise, and that promise is stored inside of the variable. The return value, you can't capture at the moment because it's on a different stack. Like when it executes, it's just not in this frame at the moment. So it's you essentially just can't return from an asynchronous callback. Something to remember. Anything inside of maybe let me share my screen so we can all see what I'm talking about or what Ellen is talking about. Are you looking at my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah. So just right, you're talking about this one here, right?
Yep.
Let me make this bigger so you can all see. And you quite rightly pointed out that you're trying to, this is the common pattern because we think of like synchronous programming, we have this function, you want to return from it and try and store this value in here, and that's not how it works. And I think you already spotted that. The only thing that you get from storing things in this variable is the return of this function, not of the callback. And the get is its own thing. You have to look into jQuery what it does, and it returns this pseudo promise thing.
What do you mean by promise?
Cool. So great question. At its simplest, it's an object, like a set of property and value pairs, and that's like a waiting, a holding object. And so we make the request and it says this is the information of the request, and at some point, data will come back to it from the response. So it's like this little container that says, I make the request, and that's the information of the request. And at some point, the response will come back and fill it with information.
But which part of that is the promise?
This part here. So if we just copy this, the return value doesn't really matter, and I whack it in here, I need to get, where is it? Let me switch into this one and do the same thing, because that's where we got loaded the jQuery. This one. So if I have a look at this thing here, can you see it's got a bunch of information? It's an object that has a bunch of key properties that I can expand and have a look at. Some are functions with EF, some are just property value pairs. So this is the information about the request, and at some point, it gets populated by the response text. And this happens in about 1/5 of a second. But it has the information of the request, and at some point, it gets populated by the information of the response. So that's what I mean about this GET request returning like this object that says we can't really do things until it's resolved, until it's finished. And the way we get around that is by using a callback that says only do this thing once we've made the request.
Yeah, but the promise, I'm still confused, like the context of using the word promise.
What's an easy way to maybe let's just do it literally. So there's a little bit of blurriness or vagueness that I want you to be able to like sit with and be fine with, and that's because this GET request doesn't quite jQuery has a couple weird things about it, but the pattern here is we want to return an object that we can then work with, but only once it's been resolved. The request is finished and the information is there, and we can use it. If we do it literally, we can use a promise object and say when it resolves, let's have some information that says, I don't know, hello. So this gives me an object that I can use, but I can't just like get at the information. And this is the same thing that's kind of happening up here. I can't get at the return value. Like I can't get at hello. I can't get at the people response just by using the result of this thing. I got to say, wait for it to be resolved and then do something. In the same way in this callback, I say, make the GET request, and when it's resolved, then execute this function, right?
Yeah.
So in the way that I would do it using this promise would be to chain onto it, then say only when it's resolved, do something. And I have to pass it a function. In the same way I'm doing like people response, let's just say it's called data, it doesn't really matter what it's called. And then execute something, let's just say console log the data.
Yeah.
So then I log it, and the then function returns another promise, but it's irrelevant to us because we've got at the information.
Okay.
So the same pattern is happening with this function here, right? I can't get at it straight away. The get method returns this object, right? Like this. I can't get at the information straight away, but I got to wait for it to resolve. And so I can do that with jQuery's get by sending a callback and say, do this at some point in time. And that's the same thing here. I'm saying, do this at some point in time after it's resolved. I mean, we're almost like saying, we've got to make it synchronous.
Yeah.
And we pass it a callback as a result. So that's a little bit more like in detail about what's actually happening here. But if you don't want to worry about it, literally don't worry about it. The most important thing in the moment is to know that you can't return from a callback. So this pattern here is like just wrong. And we're showing it to you just because this is a common thing that happens, because we're saying at the moment, most people think synchronously that says, I want to be able to like just make this request, get the data and store it in a variable. And that's not how that works. Bless you. I didn't hear it, but I saw it.
Interesting. Okay, so you can't store that people response is what we're saying. We can't store that like
you literally just cannot store it in a variable outside of the callback. So anything that you need to do it inside of this callback. You can't do it outside, and that's frequently what people new to asynchronous programming try to do.
Yeah. And there must be workarounds, I guess, that we'll do later on, because otherwise there's too much info in a callback, right?
It's what happens.
All right. Fine.
Yep. There's no way around it, because you have to, if you want it to be replicable and consistent even in tests, you put whatever information you want to happen in a callback, and you just make it nice, but you can't do anything else around it.
Okay.
Can you define other functions that you can, like, outside of the block that is the callback, and call them within the callback in order to kind of declutter the code?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Cool. Good questions. More questions.
With the question number 5, the one that had the timeout. So Amy and I played around with this and tried increasing the value so that we could actually see a delay from the timeout.
Nice.
When does the timer start for the timeout? Is the timer started at the point that set timeout executes? So then the milliseconds start counting up.
Yeah.
And so long as 1,000 of those have elapsed, then the callback will execute.
Yeah,
or
but it's not. It is. So as soon as it's set timeout callback, that starts essentially the internal clock. But it's not exactly its number of seconds later. It's at least that number of seconds later.
Yeah. So as long as the stopwatch has reached this timeout number, this code can execute, but it could have exceeded that timeout number.
Yeah.
So it's the S of set timeout is the point at which the timer starts ticking. Well,
or rather, the closing bracket.
Yeah, the bracket.
Yeah.
Cool. Cool. Thank you. Is there any way I could have got visibility of that? I couldn't think of a way that would demonstrate when the timeout was starting within, like, I mean, maybe because within the context of such a simple example.
Interesting question. I'll have a think. I don't have an answer to the top of my head. There's very likely a way.
But not a simple one.
You'd have to. Yeah, I would. Essentially, the things I would look at would be like, how do I just research set timeout, have a look at like how it accesses the browser clock, and see what happens, and see whether I get visibility on it. There should be some way to do it.
Thanks.
Good question. I like the questions that begin. How do I get visibility on this? And any other thoughts or questions or things that we learned about our first foray into asynchronous JavaScript?
Ellen, could you repeat your question? I just didn't quite understand it.
The one about the timeout.
Yeah, about the console.log thing you said, like. Well, yeah, the timeout one. It was, I guess, but trying to like get visibility on it, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I was trying to understand when the timer started ticking.
Yeah. That's an interesting one. Yeah.
And the timer starts ticking when I think the reason my question is I might have been sort of bunching two ideas together that were not really ones that went together. I was thinking, does it start at the point where the request starts, or does it start at the time when the response is received? But this example doesn't involve requests and responses.
Fine.
Because I
So
think
does the network tab not gives an indication of that?
Sorry, say that again.
Does the network like tab not help with knowing when like the get request has been made?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it will track all the requests and responses.
Would it see the timeout?
It's not a request or response.
Yeah.
So no.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I just need to step out for a minute. See you in a sec.
Cool. Okay, well, let's go back to the objectives and just double check. Our objectives are, we wanted to be able to describe the flow of control of a program as the order in which parts of the code are executed, explain the process used to follow the flow of control, and follow it to help us understand how some of these callbacks are working. And if we think about these objectives, like what next steps do you want to take to feel more confident about them? Let's just go around and just share some ideas. If you think about your objectives, where you are right now, what can you do to feel more confident about them? Let's start with top right screen. I have Amit. What things can we do?
I think just keep playing around with it.
Yeah.
To be honest.
What about you, Anastasis?
I presume the same thing, and explore asynchronicity in general as well.
Cool. As any other thoughts, questions, Ellen or Amy or Sophia? What can we do to feel more confident about our learning objectives 1, 2, and 3?
Go over the resources that you can find at the end of the repository.
Cool.
I really recommend that video. The what the heck is the event loop video is really good.
Hopefully it'll help set things in context more now.
Yeah, more of the ideas from that video are making more sense. The more of this code that I play with.
And for me, yeah, similar to Amy, I'll be looking at some terms that I'm not familiar with completely, and then go through the questions below because I haven't actually got through that as well.
Cool. Yeah, but I think it'd be great if you created a glossary, even if they don't have many definitions in, and just share them, and then we can all maybe help fill them out. Or if you do want to do all the definitions first, then we can help add to them. I think it might be fun. Because I'm sure everyone would be find that useful.
Is that directed at me?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Cool. Okay, so the next couple of days, or this evening and the next couple of days, we're still working on the thermostat and on asynchronous JavaScript, and we'll get together on Sunday to go through our learning self-assessments, and we'll spend some time, a little bit more time on some of these exercises with asynchronous JavaScript. It's quite fun. I quite enjoy it, so we'll have some fun then on Sunday. We'll be continuing with thermostat for one more week as well. Some of you asked me about the end of unit challenge, and let me share it with you now, just in case you wanted to get a start with it. And I think it's nice. Cool. Let me put it. I think it's already linked in the part-time course directory. July.
Does that mean?
Sorry. Sabia, go ahead.
Does that mean the airport challenge wasn't actually the individual challenge we had to do? It was something that we had to do in our own time across?
Yeah, it was part of last week's sort of like pairing challenges, where we did the FizzBuzz challenge, learning, played around with things, FizzBuzz challenge, and the airport challenge.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. And then we have like 3 weeks of JavaScript 1, and then we have 2 weeks of JavaScript 2. And the end of unit challenge for this 3 weeks is this one on the screen right now.
Wait, is this for this Sunday or next Sunday? Sorry.
It's for next Sunday. So I thought I'd just share it now. If anyone wanted to like read through it or maybe get a head start on it, it's entirely up to you. I sent the link into the Slack channel. And yeah, all the normal things. It's just JavaScript. People always think it's more complicated than it actually is. And the only thing that I want you to focus on is just doing the scorecard. Don't try and build a game. Don't try and build like an interface to it. Just do the JavaScript logic as you've been doing with the thermostat logic. So think of it almost exactly the same as the thermostat, just a different domain as a bowling scorecard. So you can add scores to it and just get it to calculate the total score. Test drive it always, and I'll probably talk about it again next weekend. But that's the JavaScript challenge.
When you say test drive it,
yep.
Do you mean
test drive it? Yes, test first.
So test driving the underlying source code, like if there's a model of the score, makes sense. I'm not entirely sure. Are we supposed to be test driving our kind of JavaScript interactions, like writing tests for, like effectively like Capybara had the click this and this happens.
Cool. Yeah, the bowling challenge. I don't want you to worry about the interface just yet. So the first version of it is just the thermostat logic, just like you have functions that do things. That's it. And no clicking things, no browser-based stuff at the moment. Just get the logic done. Once you've done the logic of the game, then we can start thinking about how do you add elements on the page that when you click and get the visual stuff. But let's just focus on the logic first.
Okay. Cool.
We don't have to link any APIs, I presume, eh? No. Yeah.
Unless you want to. Just get like the weather API in or something. The weather is? No.
The weather is sunny, so you can go bowling, eh?
Exactly.
There's a step in the thermostat challenge that is about styling, and unless it's changed since I last looked at it, the image links on that page do not work in the part-time version of the repository.
Cool. I will update that.
And they sound like they could be entertaining, so I would like to be able to see them. As a student, so that I can laugh, I would like to see the images.
In the styling step, yeah?
Yeah.
Cool. I'll update it. In a pinch, just find it's slightly similar. I've changed a few things, but slightly similar, so you should be able to find it in the course repository, the full-time course repository. But I will update those promptly.
Thanks.
All right, one more minute. Any last questions for me? Thing. All right. Well, I will. I'll disappear now. Amit, let's go chat, and otherwise, see you all on Sunday.
See you.
Bye, guys.
Bye bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Leave something going.